This morning, I opened up an article about the impact of COVID-19 on hunger around the world. The article opened with the image of a malnourished child reaching towards a caregiver. For better or worse, I closed the article right then. My stomach already roiling with horror, and my whole being feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the issue. However, as these things go, a few minutes later I turned to my sermon research, in this case rereading the chapter on Matthew 21 through 16 in William R. Herzog's book, Parables of Subversive Speech. Herzog reminds us that the day laborers in Jesus' day were people who died of malnutrition, people that society thought of as expendables. And of course, those expendable people, were the ones whose labor enriched wealthy vineyard owners, along with kings, emperors, the military, the bureaucrats, and the religious leaders. The work of agriculture was more profitable the cheaper the labor was. And the work of the day laborers was considered so invaluable as to be worth less than what a person needed to eat in a day. This did not make my stomach feel any better. Then I thought of the book White Trash, the 400-year untold story of class in America by Nancy Eisenberg that the Intersectional Justice Committee Book Club read. In that book, Eisenberg explains that this country was colonized and founded while assuming that 10 to 15% of the white population was expendable, language that she eventually traces to white trash. And of course, this is in addition to the dehumanization of Native Americans as their land was stolen, of Africans and African descendants in enslavement, and the regular dehumanization of people of color. As I read White Trash, I was horrified to realize that the people who were considered expendable as our country was founded, and then later the ones sent to work in mines, regardless of safety conditions, the ones sent to build railroads and dynamite mountains. Those workers, for example, whose safety didn't matter because there were always more people who could be brought into work, and whose wages didn't matter because there are always people willing to work for anything. The ones who died young after hard lives. These are the same as the day laborers that Jesus talks about. And it hasn't changed. They're the same people who live with food insecurity in the richest nation in history. The same people for whom subpar education is deemed sufficient. The same people who don't have access to health care. The same people from whom wages are often stolen without recourse. We still have expendable people in our society. We just don't talk about it in the same ways anymore. And worse, our country's policies enable this and exacerbate wealth inequality around the world, so that there are even more people who are desperately poor and expendable outside the United States than in it. And within the United States, the number of people deemed unworthy of sufficient nutrition is a moral atrocity. And of course, the pandemic has made all of this worse. where once, not so long ago, like last year, 10 to 15% of the population in the US was hungry, at least double that amount are now estimated to be hungry. 30% of the population. There are some things we can do if we're able. We can give to Schenectady Community Ministries to help with the food pantry that is providing food in Schenectady County. They also need volunteers. Similarly, we can give to or help with our Sunday morning breakfast or the regional food bank. The organization Bread for the World is our long-term partner in education and advocacy to end hunger, and they have many ways for us to respond. I invite you to look them up. But for now, I want to look at this parable. Because not only do I believe Herzog that this parable was about the struggles of day laborers and the ways that vineyard owners and the systems that they were a part of existed to oppress the poor and extract wealth for the wealthy. I think Jesus told this story to day laborers, to people that society considered expendable. And because I think that God and Jesus are on the side of the people the world sees as expendable. In particular, I think Jesus' ministry was primarily aimed at the poorest of the poor. His teaching was teaching for those who were struggling. And that definitely includes this story, which I think should impact how we hear it. The people who were the first hearers associated with the day laborers, those people who had lost their ancestral land, who had no notable trade or craft, and who had fallen through whatever safety net existed. These were people waiting and hoping to be needed in the fields so that they would be paid, so that they could eat that day. Not well, just eat. The first shock in the parable is that the landowner comes out to hire them himself, because that didn't happen in real life. But it helps the story exemplify who's benefiting from most from the day laborers' work. The second thing to note is that while the laborers hired first got to agree to a wage, not a good one, but the normal one, the next set of laborers went to the fields without even an agreement. And the final set didn't even get to say. They were sent to the fields without being told if they even would be paid. Another thing to notice is that this is a vineyard, not a wheat field or a vegetable plot. The owner of a vineyard had to be wealthier than average, an average landowner at that, because a vineyard took 4 years of intense labor as an investment before any profit would come in. That said, a vineyard was much more profitable than other uses of land, so wealthy people like to buy other people's ancestral, sustainable farmland and make it into vineyards. And the day laborers were the very people who had lost their land because the system exploited them. So the owner responds to the complaints of those who had worked 12 hours, who were offended that they were being paid the same as those who worked 1 hour, because he intends to dismiss the value of their work. And this is especially insulting because the work that they did was the only thing the day laborers had left to offer. So in saying, I can give what I want, it's my money, it doesn't matter what work you did, your work is not connected to what I pay you. The owner implies that the laborers are entirely worthless. But the parable itself tells us something different. The landowner had to keep hiring people all day because there was so much work to do that he wasn't even able to estimate how much labor he needed. The vineyard would not have been able to exist, much less produce anything, without labor. And the subsistence wages of the laborers were, of course, part of making the vineyard owner even wealthier. But more so, the work of the day laborers was imperative to his wealth. Wealth that, again, he's making off of land that they once used to live instead of struggling and eventually failing to survive. The parable also makes clear that the owner's actions aimed at keeping the day laborers competing with each other instead of noticing the actions of the owner. Herzog says this: to ensure a timely harvest, the landowner needed their labor. Yet the lack of cohesion so evident among the day laborers allowed the landowner to conquer them by dividing them. That's why the owner spoke to only one of them. The banishment of that one served to intimidate the others and put them in their place. The owner smothered the truth that he was dependent on them, and that as a result, they could have power, but only a power that grew out of their solidarity. Divided, they would fall one by one before the withering hostility and judgment of the elite. Jesus told a story that let his hearers see more clearly the power they had, the worth and value they had, and the need they had to work together instead of competing with each other. Because the system was designed to oppress. The system today is too. And opting out isn't really an option for most people. At least not opting out alone. But together, we can choose a different system. Our country has more than enough food for all the people. Our world has more than enough food for all the people. The issue is not food. It's distribution. And Jesus reminds us that the people working together can work for the common good. The option for changing the system is strongest when the need is the greatest. And that might be today. May Jesus inspire us to work for the common good. And may God strengthen us and offer us wisdom so that the work we do is productive towards the common good. Amen.